Hi, Rich Leiter again. Welcome to my channel, Thoughts on Writing. Today I would like to address the subject, why should we read books? Specifically, why should we read literature or fiction or novels? Originally when I started this channel, I had the intention of becoming a booktuber like other people all over the internet, and I figured I would review some books and I would intersperse it with excerpts from my own writing. It would be a good way to publicize my writing. Sounded like a good idea, and I have done some book reviews. The one I like the best is the one on Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. But the thing is, I have a lot of thoughts about book reviews, booktubers, booktubing, and reading in general. Why read? Well, now, if you ask an academic, if you ask a professor of English literature, for instance, or comparative literature, if you ask them why read, well, they'll say, of course you have to read. I mean, they'll say, what are you talking about? They will scoff at the notion that you shouldn't read books or read a lot of them. Because you have to remember, these people pay their mortgages by teaching literature, okay? So what do you expect them to say? They're all going to be for that. In the same way that if you talk to a psychotherapist, about why should I see it? Why should I have any psychotherapy? They'll say, well, of course you need psychotherapy. Everybody should have psychotherapy because they earn their bread and butter by that, right? So if you ask an academic, they're not going to really be able to talk to you about this, I feel. It's kind of it's a complex issue. There's no cut and dry answers to this. One thing I've noticed about booktubers is that with booktubers, there seems to be like this race or competition to read as many books as possible, to have a schedule, to read one book a week, to forge on ahead. They kind of make booktubing like a competition almost. And it seems a little bit crazy to me. I understand they have to maintain their channel, so they have to keep reading more books to discuss, but I can't read a book a week. I'm an extremely slow reader, so just on that basis alone, I don't think I would be such a great booktuber. But like I say, people like to read for different reasons. Now, if you are the kind of a person who likes to read novels, if you like to read Crime and Punishment, Moby Dick, Heart of Darkness, Ulysses, any number of books. If you like to do it just because you enjoy doing it, in the same way that certain people enjoy going to the movies or watching television, well then great. I think it certainly is a much more refined, elegant form of entertainment than going to the movies, or watching television. At least you're not being a passive, your mind isn't passive. To read, you have to be actively engaged in it. So I'm all for that. That's about the only reason I think that's very, very clear cut for reading books. Now the next reason for reading books would be because there's a notion that if you read books, if you read great literature, it will make you wise. It will make you somebody who now has the wisdom to navigate through life successfully. Well, I don't know about that. It's true that books books do shape your perceptions to a great extent. Certain books have shaped my perceptions and tastes and outlook to a great extent. I won't deny that. But to read books, to read a novel, to read Moby Dick, for an example, with the intention that once you read it or study it or pore over it, you're somehow going to be an enlightened person, I think doesn't hold any water. How do people become wise? Well, I don't think they really become wise by reading books. I think people become wise, if they do become wise, by making a heck of a lot of mistakes in life. And just by living and just by experiencing life. It's a mysterious process. And I think that when you read a book, the book really is kind of a yardstick of how far a great book. I mean, if you read a great book, it will be a yardstick of just how far you've come in life. If you can relate to a great book, well, that will be an indication of just, like I say, how far you've come. But the actual process of reading a book per se will not give you automatic wisdom. Now, curiously, when I was very young, I'm for sure I'm not the only one, I actually believed that. I believed that if I read any number of great books that I would become wise, that it would somehow deliver me from the miserable state. I was a very miserable young man, and somehow I felt that I could escape my misery by reading books. Well, you can escape them in a way if you entering into the world of a book, but it's not going to deliver you from your psychological miserable state of mind. It's not going to do that. I kind of learned that as I grew, as I got older. So books are kind of a double-edged sword when it comes to wisdom. It does shape you, but it's not going to make you Buddha. No way, in my opinion. Now, if you are a writer, or you want to be a writer, and you read books specifically because you want to learn how to write, well, again, this is a double-edged sword. It's there's no one way of looking at it. I mean, I don't think you can. I think that reading a lot of books and analyzing them very, very deeply, the style, the technique that's used in books, I think that will obviously it will help you to an enormous extent. There's no question about it. But whether it will give you the innate, but then again, I'm of the old school that writers are born, not made. I mean, you have to be born with a certain innate verbal facility. Books are not going to teach you that either. So it's kind of a middle road. At the same time, you could have great technical expertise with writing, either because you were born with that facility or you've learned it from studying books, but that doesn't mean that you're going to have anything to say. I mean, the fact that you may be technically proficient in writing doesn't mean that you have a vision of life that really or an original vision of life that warrants being written about. That's a whole different subject. There are many writers who write well, but what are they writing about that's so great? Now, I will say this also. I will say that you have to be very, very careful or cautious if you want to be a writer and you have to be very selective about reading books in that instance, because you want to make sure, you want to read books and you want to learn how great writers have written, technically speaking, but at the same time, you don't want to become so overwhelmed by reading so many books so that your own style is lost in the process. You don't want to become so tremendously self-conscious when you try to write something so that you think to yourself, am I sounding like Thomas Mann now? Am I sounding like Herman Melville? Maybe it needs a little bit of Dostoevsky here, like a patchwork quilt. You don't want to do that either. And I feel that a lot of booktubers who, I don't know how many want to become writers, but I'm sure some of them want to become writers. I think they become so overwhelmed with all the different themes and all the different ideas and all the different styles that different writers have, that they themselves get lost in the process. So you have to be very careful about that, about not becoming completely swallowed up in the in the vortex of scholarship. There are many very, very, very bright people out there, I'm sure, who probably have things to say, but they've read so much Shakespeare, they're so aware of the enormity of Shakespeare or of some other writer, that they become so intimidated by it that they say, well, who am I to write anything compared to Shakespeare? If you read too much, if you drink too much of the Kool-Aid, you might just find that the desire to write becomes obliterated. Walking in the shadow of a genius like Shakespeare or Tolstoy is sometimes counterproductive to the creative impulse, is what I'm saying. Another thing that I've noticed is that a lot of people will read books that are considered the classics, and they will never challenge them. They will only read them with the idea that this is a great book, and that they have to sort of like worship at the feet of this book. And this isn't necessarily the case. Just to give you an example, I mean, Crime and Punishment is considered to be an iconic work of literature, one of the handful of the greatest books ever written. Well, I read Crime and Punishment 50 years ago, and I read it again recently about a year ago, and I wasn't that crazy about it this time. I won't go into it, but I wasn't that crazy about it for a number of reasons. Other people have mentioned this too. I think that there's a guy, there's another booktuber, his name is Cliff, and he talked about his impressions of Crime and Punishment, and basically his criticism of it is kind of the same as mine. So you might want to check that out. I forgot what his channel is called. It's probably the biggest YouTube channel, booktube channel on YouTube. How about Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer, another iconic book, right? Well, I read it, and I did a book review on it, and I did not find this to be an iconic book by any means. I went into great, elaborate detail talking about the pros and cons of Henry Miller, but I ain't going to read Henry Miller again, that's for damn sure. So that's another thing. I mean, a lot of readers, once they read a book, their mind is kind of closed from page one. They don't really think about it. They just want to worship it. And that's something else that you need to be... Now, again, I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to go to the other extreme and be some sophomoric idiot who just wants to take a book like Moby Dick and just tear it to pieces because you happen to be sophomoric. No, it doesn't mean that. You have to read... that's really reading. When you read a classic so intently that you can actually make some intelligent criticism of it, if there are any to be made. That's reading deeply. So that's it. Those are just some of my thoughts about reading books in general. Thanks a lot.